What happens when a love story becomes a spiritual empire, and then a psychological trap? What happens when your longing for deep connection and divine union is repackaged and sold back to you as a subscription model? Today we're talking about Twin Flames Universe, but this isn't just about Jeff and Shaleia, the founders of TFU. It's about all of us, and how the search for love, meaning, and spiritual validation can sometimes leave us more lost than found. So what exactly is a twin flame? A twin flame is the idea that you're not a whole soul on your own. The belief is that before you were born, your soul was split in two. One half became you, and the other half took form in someone else. So meeting your twin flame is like a soul reunion. You coming back into full alignment with the one person who's said to reflect your soul perfectly. Now this is different than a soulmate. A soulmate could be anyone who deeply resonates with you, a romantic partner, a close friend, even a family member. Someone who helps you grow and feel seen. But a twin flame? That's your other half, the one person who completes you. It's a concept that exploded in popularity because it offers something compelling. The idea that your most intense relationships, even the messy or painful ones, have a divine purpose. That the chaos you feel might actually be a sign that it's meant to be. Before Twin Flame Universe, Jeff had experimented with several online ventures: EndersAdventures.com, Divine Guide Readings, Awakened Intimacy. None of them took off, but it was clear that he wanted to be seen as a teacher, a leader, and a spiritual authority. In 2013, he met Shaleia online, and they felt an immediate, intense connection. Something they framed as their own twin flame reunion, and they believed it was their mission to help others do the same. Early on, they launched a book called Twin Flames: Finding Your Ultimate Lover, and followed it up with coaching programs, YouTube videos, and what would become their flagship product, the Twin Flame Ascension School. And it resonated, because it promised that there was one perfect person out there, and that with the right spiritual tools, you could find them. That if you followed the formula, meditated hard enough, and paid for the right classes, you could unlock your divine partner. It wasn't just dating advice, it was cosmic matchmaking. They hosted events, Zoom calls, meetups, and built a brand around identifying and confirming people's twin flames, positioning themselves as the only ones with this special ability. One of the core teachings was called the mirror exercise. It was Jeff and Shaleia's signature tool, a 4-step process designed to help you remove blocks and align with your twin flame. It went like this. Step 1, identify something that's upsetting you. Step 2, write it out as a sentence like, "My twin flame is ignoring me." Step 3, change all the pronouns to point to yourself. "I am ignoring myself." And step 4, ask, "Is this true in any way?" If the answer is yes, then you found the part of you that needs healing. On the surface, it sounds like a tool for self-reflection, like shadow work. And in theory, the idea of looking inward instead of outward for answers is great. But inside Twin Flames Universe, it didn't function as a gentle tool. It became a psychological trap. Let's say someone's twin flame was ghosting them, or in another relationship. The advice from TFU wasn't to accept it and move on. It was to do another mirror exercise. Dig deeper, heal harder. Because if your twin flame is rejecting you, it must be a reflection of how you're rejecting yourself. According to Jeff and Shaleia, if someone else hurts you, you are the problem. If they block you, abandon you, or treat you poorly, that's your mirror, not their free will, not incompatibility. If you just pushed through your own wounds, if you healed enough, you'd get the love you were promised. That's what kept people locked in. Not just hoping for love, but believing that every heartbreak was their fault and every red flag was just a spiritual test. Now let's take a look at its business model. Students weren't just encouraged to learn the teachings, they were encouraged to become coaches. But in order to do that, they had to enroll in TFU's certification programs, which weren't cheap. We're talking thousands of dollars. Once certified, they were expected to recruit new members. The more people you brought in, the more spiritual clout you earned. You weren't just a student anymore. You were part of the inner circle. And if that setup sounds familiar, it's because it mirrors a multi-level marketing structure. Only here, the product wasn't skincare or supplements. It was spiritual enlightenment. What's more, Jeff and Shaleia began telling people who their twin flame was. Sometimes it was someone they had barely interacted with. Sometimes it was someone of the same gender, even if that person didn't identify that way. And if people expressed discomfort, they were told that their resistance was just a block and proof that they weren't spiritually evolved enough. Take the case of Marley, a 19-year-old member. Jeff and Shaleia told her that a 30-year-old man named Joshua from Utah, who was randomly messaging her on Facebook, was her twin flame. She had never met him, never spoken to him, and had no interest in him, but she was told to reach out. When she did, she found out that Joshua had a criminal history. Despite this, Jeff and Shaleia insisted that this guy was her twin flame. Because Joshua couldn't move out of state, Marley uprooted her life and moved to Utah to be with him. The relationship lasted 3 years. Joshua, it turned out, was struggling with severe, untreated mental illness, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. He refused medication, and the relationship became volatile. When Marley turned to Jeff for guidance, his advice wasn't to protect herself or to get help. Instead, he told her to go back to the mirror exercise. Joshua's behavior, he said, was a reflection of her wounds. If she could just heal more, she could create the safety that Joshua needed to open up, to trust her, and to eventually change. And then there's the story of Anne. In TFU, every twin flame union must consist of a divine masculine and a divine feminine. One leads, one follows. Jeff and Shaleia claimed they could intuitively assign which role each person was meant to embody. Anne, who was in a same-sex relationship with a woman named Katrina, was assigned the divine masculine, and that to truly align with her union, she needed to embrace that identity fully. During one of the Zoom calls with the group, Jeff pushed her to change her name from Anne to Dan and begin using the pronouns he and him. When Anne said that it doesn't resonate with her, Jeff mocked her, saying things like Dan the man and claiming she was avoiding her divine truth. When she refused to go along with it, she was stripped of her coaching position and income. In 2018, Jeff rebranded Twin Flames Universe as the Church of Union, a legally recognized religious organization. On paper, this gave them non-profit status, allowing them to sidestep certain taxes and operate with fewer business regulations. But this wasn't just a legal pivot. It marked a fundamental shift in tone and language. The language became more dogmatic. Jeff and Shaleia didn't just claim to be spiritual teachers anymore. They began referring to themselves as divine beings, God and Goddess incarnate. Jeff went so far as to say that he was the second coming of Jesus Christ and insisted he looked just like him. Inside the community, everything changed. Donations became tithes. Work became unpaid volunteer service for the mission. Members moved into shared homes, properties that were owned by TFU, where roles were assigned and daily life was heavily controlled. In one particularly disturbing instance, members were told they had been chosen to help conceive what Jeff and Shaleia called golden children, future leaders who would help bring union to earth. Some were encouraged to act as surrogates, with Jeff and Shaleia choosing who would conceive with whom. At this point, it wasn't about love anymore, or healing, or even finding twin flames. It had become a hierarchy, where two people sat at the top, claiming divine authority, not just over the members' love lives, but over their identities, their bodies, and their futures. And yet, many people stayed, which raises the deeper question: why? How could anyone fall for this? Most people didn't stumble into Twin Flames Universe by accident. They were already searching through therapy, dating apps, spiritual work, and healing modalities. And when you've been doing that for years without the results you hope for, you get tired. You start to feel like maybe you're the problem. That kind of exhaustion creates vulnerability. So when someone comes along offering clarity and structure and a method that promises deep spiritual love, it can feel like a lifeline. especially when it's paired with community, ritual, and a shared language that makes your pain feel understood. TFU gave people a framework. It gave them the sense that they were finally doing something that worked. But the spiritual language that seemed so empowering at first became a tool for control. When the leaders are calling themselves God and Goddess, even a sliver of doubt can get pushed aside, because you start thinking about what's at stake if you speak up. Your community, your status, and your income. It becomes easier to silence that inner voice than to risk losing everything. So they stayed. And over time, they had learned to suppress their intuition and let Jeff and Shaleia do the thinking for them. Unfortunately, this dynamic isn't unique to TFU. You can find it in wellness circles, coaching programs, and even algorithmic-driven advice accounts. The branding may be different, but the emotional pull, the mechanism, is the same, which is why it's so important to call out what's really happening here. It's not about growth or about love. It's gaslighting. Ultimately, this isn't about Jeff and Shaleia, because the reality is there will always be people who claim to have the answers, who speak with conviction, who promise healing, love, or purpose, and who will exploit the very hopes and dreams we've been brave enough to share. So instead of focusing on how to stop people like that, the more important question is, how do we empower ourselves? How do we sharpen our discernment without closing our hearts? It starts with awareness, with remembering that no matter how wise or enlightened someone seems, they're still human. People have blind spots. They make mistakes. They're not experts in every area of life. And sometimes, even with good intentions, they cause harm. That's why it's so important not to hand over your authority to anyone, not to a coach, a guru, a partner, or a spiritual teacher. Growth should feel like expansion, not confinement. The moment a teaching starts to box you in or override your inner knowing, that's your cue to pause and reassess. Others can support us. They can offer language, tools, and insight. But they are not your source of truth. They're just one perspective in a world full of perspectives. The ultimate teacher is you, your lived experience, your inner wisdom, your higher self. So if something feels off, honor that. If your body says no, listen. If a path that once felt empowering starts to feel like a cage, it's okay to walk away. That's not failure. That's your wisdom kicking in. We're all growing and learning, and the more we come back to ourselves as the source, the less likely we are to get pulled into systems that ask us to trade our freedom for the illusion of certainty. As always, thank you so much for listening. If this episode stirred something in you, whether it was recognition, discomfort, or just reflection, I invite you to sit with it. Not in fear, but in curiosity. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful thing we can do is stay connected to ourselves, to question with love, to trust our gut, and to remember that the real work isn't about finding the answers out there. It's about learning how to trust the answers in here. Until next time, namaste.